Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Steve. Welcome to All Things Mad Men, from Chip and Dip to Zooby Zoo.
We started this podcast to connect to Mad Men fans like us who pick up something new with every rewatch.
Be advised, this podcast will include spoilers, so we can talk about character arcs all the way through the final season of the series.
We're breaking down each episode of Mad Men, discussing the big and small moments, and posing questions to listeners so we can get your insights. Let's get started with Mad Men C to Z. Hey everybody, today we're talking about Mad Men Season 1, Episode 11, Indian Summer. This episode takes place in October 1960. It was written by Matthew Weiner and Tom Palmer and directed by Tim Hunter.
The first scene of the episode opens up with Adam Whitman, who's mailing a box to Dick, and he throws down some cash and goes up to his room and hangs himself.
Worst episode opening ever.
It's pretty dark. Adam's in a suit, but he looks disheveled. I guess the question is, what's in the box that he's mailing to Dick?
And we also don't get any inciting incident information, so we don't know very much about what Adam is going through. All we know is that we can infer that Adam is lonely. Dawn is at least somewhat to blame for that part. Do you agree?
I think so, and I think it further underlines what was Adam seeking in reaching out to Dick. It wasn't seeking money or anything. He was lonely and he just wanted family and to cling to some semblance of family, and Dawn rejected that.
So even though we don't know this character very well, you have a lot of sympathy, and it's a harsh way to begin a TV show. It definitely leaves you wondering.
The next scene cuts to Peggy on the phone, talking with her mother, who appears to be trying to set her up on a date with someone she knew in her past.
We see her mother wanting to set her up on a date, and she says she's working a lot. And this could be an excuse to avoid this particular guy, but this is a theme for Peggy. Her work matters to her a lot, and she tends to choose it over her personal life. So it's interesting to see that this early on in the show.
And I think it keeps with this theme of loneliness, where we've just come from Adam, which I think, we'll say loneliness was a major factor for him. We're going to later in this episode see some loneliness with Betty. And in this case, Peggy's mother is concerned about her loneliness.
I don't know that Peggy feels lonely, though. That's an interesting question to me because I see that concern that her mother has for her, but I feel like Peggy seems satisfied with where she is in her life, different from, say, Betty, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
And Peggy's also had an interaction with Pete, which I guess addresses loneliness, and it's not gone well. So it could be that Peggy's in a place where she's learned a lesson about not seeking a bad relationship at the cost of that, and turning her focus and attention to her job, which seems to line up in this episode. She's working hard and working after hours towards her profession.
Moving on, we have another really quick scene. Joan is trying to find out how Roger is after his heart attack, and the audience is reminded that even though we know she cares, Joan couldn't go visit him without a scandal. So she's trying to check in with Dawn to find out any information. And she says, I hope he knows how concerned. And then she pauses. We all are. So she's trying to make it like she doesn't have this incredibly personal relationship with Roger.
Yeah. And after on the back end of this scene, Pete mentions that Joan is being such a bitch lately, which I think maybe alludes to she's concerned and she's not herself. And that's manifesting maybe in her attitude in the office.
It's so true to form classy that Pete will talk about Joan to a room full of people behind her back, though.
That's Pete. The next scene goes into the office, and they're talking about this product, a weight loss gizmo. The men seem at a loss as to what they can do here. They can't claim it causes weight loss. They've got some testimonials. They're trying to figure out what to do with it, and they're creatively stymied at this point.
She took it the wrong way. Yes, Harry, maybe not the best thing is to give a weight loss device to your wife. That's maybe not the best move.
What's interesting to me is, again, why do they turn to Peggy as a potential source here? It's because of their failure on their own side. So they're desperate. They're looking for some other input, and the idea comes up, hey, maybe we can give it to Peggy. And I think it's Freddie who raises that idea, as he did the first time.
Yes, Peggy only walks into the room because she's serving Dawn a glass of ice water, and she's put on even more weight. She walks in. They all watch her walk in and walk out. Fred says, What about her? Maybe lightning will strike twice. And interestingly, Pete tries to shut it down. He says, I don't think Peggy's the answer. I promised my friend we'd go with the big guns. Don overrides Pete's objections. He says the big guns have been silent. I wonder, do you think Don is leaning into using Peggy because she did a good job for Beljolie, or do you think he just enjoys thwarting Pete's objection?
I think it's the former. I think Don is similar to Bert Cooper in this sense of he's just looking for something effective. He's mission oriented here. They need an answer for this product. I'm sure he enjoys getting to push against Pete's, attempt to keep Peggy out. But really what his focus is here is he needs an answer, and nobody in the room has anything, it seems.
And in contrast, everything is personal to him. So for him, it doesn't matter how great Peggy is. He wants to shut her out because of his own personal relationship with her. So yeah, he's awful.
And then even Dawn says to Peggy, it's an assignment, not an account, delineating the project nature of this and not allowing her imagination to run away with her.
Yeah, I felt like he had a bit of an edge. So just to back up a bit, they call Peggy back in. Fred says to Peggy, you'd be perfect for writing this weight loss device ad. And she's a little bit defensive when she says, why me? And Don's answer seems to mollify her a little bit. He says, because you're a woman and we'd like your point of view. And she says, I'm getting another account. And this edge that Don has, he says, it's an assignment, not an account. I wonder why he's taking such care to manage expectations with this clarification.
I think it's something where the writing really rings true to me in life, where I think there is a lot of energy that goes into keeping people in their place. And that's how I interpreted this scene where Peggy's potentially getting out of place or thinking this is something more than perhaps what's intended. So Don's just policing that boundary, that margin, and enforcing it there. So again, it didn't strike me as being particularly personal to Peggy. I got the vibe that anyone who got out of place would get a similar adjustment to just ensure they stay inside the lines.
Well, Peggy seems really pleased to be working on the product as a writer, no matter what they're willing to call her involvement. So you feel like this is a win for her.
Yeah, totally do. And this leads into an amusing next scene.
In the next scene, we get a taste of Peggy and her roommate at her apartment. They don't seem to get along all that well, and I feel like it's such smart writing to have them bicker over the phone bill. Peggy says, I don't use it. And Marjorie goes, you should just use it more then, because it's your half and you owe it and you should pay it. And that's such a normal thing for roommates who don't get along very well to argue over. Peggy tries to end the conversation by saying she has to work. And her roommate points out, I don't know why you do that, meaning work from home. And she says, when I leave the office, I'm done. And this is another glimpse of Peggy going above and beyond for her job. And her roommate doesn't share that trait at all. So we've talked about how Peggy is so different from Joan. And we see again here, she also is different from her roommate. She stands alone in that way.
And I think it also underlines the difference in role that Peggy's seeking. She wants to be a professional, and for many professionals, the job doesn't end at the end of the time clock workday. When you're not a professional, often it's more the opposite. It's you're on the clock, and once you're off the clock, you're free and clear. So I like this allusion to Peggy seeking something higher or moving up in terms of socioeconomic class. She's seeking to be a professional. In a room alone now, Peggy's looking at the product, decides to try it out herself, and then in quite a humorous scene quickly discovers that it's a very stimulating product, and what it's really offering is sexual stimulation rather than any weight loss benefit.
Yeah, it looks like a diaper with wires on it. And I love her shock. So when she realizes what's happening, she cries out and she takes it off and she kicks it away. And she's just staring at it, panting like she can't believe what's just happened.
Yeah, it's a fun scene, and I think really underlines the naivety of Peggy. And, she's not a woman of the world, despite some of her adventures we'd seen to this point.
Did any part of you think that it might be a prank by the office guys?
No, I never really contemplated that. It would be pretty elaborate to have a whole piece of equipment and all the rest of it and a fake meeting and the rest. So I guess I accepted it as at face value in the script.
In the next really quick scene, it cuts from Peggy to a fan in the Draper bedroom. Betty's reading a magazine in bed. She's smoking. She hears a noise, but it's not anything. And she turns out the light and goes to sleep alone. So Peggy's alone and unmarried. And Betty's also alone, even though she is married. And there is a very quick scene that cuts to where Dawn is. Dawn is in bed with Rachel while Betty waits at home for him. And even though it's a wordless scene, you feel a lot of empathy for her, I think, too. What a waste of possibility, this human being. And you're supposed to have married somebody and love them, and he's never around.
Well, in the contrast to cutting then to Dawn and Rachel in bed, obviously very much into each other, it really, I think, sets Dawn in a very bad light.
And you can see in a very big shift, Rachel seems invested in this relationship in spite of herself. She did not want this to happen. She expresses guilt. She says, "You must have a really powerful mind because I can't control mine. I keep thinking about us being together." She says, "I don't understand how this works, where it goes." All the time leading up to them being together, she resisted because she knew that this was going to be difficult. And now she's in it. She's still struggling with some of those same things, but she does seem very happy to be with him in spite of those reservations.
Yeah, I think they're very much in love with each other is the vibe I get. I think Rachel's still asking the right questions, but I think she's a little love struck and blinded to his lack of answers to them. The other thing that struck me here was the contrast to Betty alone at home. It made me wonder, did Don love Betty? Did he ever love her? Did they ever have moments like this? And if so, where did it go? Or was it something they never had? Because we know Don's never opened up to Betty in this way, and she doesn't know these facts about his background. So what do you think the difference is here between Don and Betty and Don and Rachel?
That's a great question. I know that we have seen moments, even in season one, where Dawn and Betty were happy together. They had that nice day together for Mother's Day, and they had a fun, flirty bedroom conversation after their day out together. And they had a couple of good evenings. So we get to see them happy a little bit, but all of the other moments seem so fraught with tension. And there's something about Rachel that makes him feel comfortable sharing things with her. I think, ironically, it's kind of like he has more at stake with Betty. So if he tells Betty the truth and she doesn't accept him for who he is, then his whole life falls apart because they're married. Whereas if he tells Rachel and Rachel doesn't accept him for who he is, he's not tied to her. So he can maybe risk a little bit more with Rachel. But there's also a quality about Rachel that I think really fits him. That thing that she talked about that feeling of aloneness or feeling apart from other people. She says, "There's something about you that makes me think you know it too." So I think he thinks that Rachel understands him in a way that Betty never can.
I like that idea of Don being cornered by his own deception and lies and not being forthcoming to this point. And I think you also make a great point that because he's opened up to Rachel right from the start, the sort of go, no go decision has been taken. And Rachel doesn't seem to care at all about his rough background. This is built on a much more solid foundation, it sounds like, than the image and pitch that Don must have made to Betty back in the day.
So I'm not really cheering at this point for Dawn to abandon Betty and the kids and run away with Rachel. Although I do think that Rachel and Dawn, if he hadn't been already married, they would have made a better couple. Just overall, they seem better matched. But I'm so disappointed here because it seems to be falling into such a stereotypical other woman thing so quickly because he says, "I'm right where I'm supposed to be." And he kisses her and he says, "I just haven't figured out what to do yet." And what a practiced cheater line that is. I mean, I just wonder how many times he said that to other women. It feels insincere. Like that's just what he's supposed to say.
That's an interesting observation. I didn't read it as a line there. And listening to Weiner's commentary where he said, Don is in love with her. He thinks there's a future here and it would involve leaving Betty. I took the line at face value in that maybe this isn't a line that he's ever given Midge because it was always understood what that dalliance was with Midge and that this interaction with Rachel is different. My problem with it is probably more from the sense of Rachel knew exactly the problems of this whole thing. Now she's in it. She's asking the same questions that were holding her back previously. And I guess I'm somewhat similar to you in that I'm just thinking, okay, is she just love struck or, the pleasure is outweighing the question marks at this point. But I get the sense that this dynamic between them can't endure at this pace, this fever. Something's got to give.
Yes, yes. Maybe he does believe it when he says it to her, that he's trying to figure out a way for them to be together. But every stereotypical cheating married man says exactly this type of thing. So to me, it really signals that it isn't going to work. There is no future in it because it so completely matches all of those types of failed extra relationships.
The next scene takes us back to the office. Don's putting on a shirt because he keeps a stockpile of clean shirts for when
Let's
stays in the city overnight.
let's just talk
Everyone
about that. The infidelity shirt drawer. I mean, I don't know if all the men in Sterling Cooper have an infidelity shirt drawer, but yes. When do you go and buy all your shirts and put them in there so that when you have an overnight with your many mistresses, you always have a pile? That is such a symbol of excess.
And I get the sense there's a few shirts in the drawer too, right? Don doesn't have one extra shirt. Don's got a drawer full of extra shirts.
Yeah, and we saw him changing shirts after being at Midge's and the pilot too, so we definitely know this is his habit.
Peggy comes into the office to give her report on the weight loss belt. And obviously, Peggy's embarrassed about what she's discovered. Don seems unaware of the embarrassment, but he's frustrated that he's not getting some clear feedback from Peggy along the lines of what he was hoping for. Eventually, they get through the awkwardness, and Peggy's embarrassment is now shared with Don as it's clear what this product does for women.
It's so funny. He says, "What is your unique point of view?" And she goes, "I wrote it down." And he's putting a shirt on and he goes, "Summarize." And she's like, "I wrote it down." And then he opens the file and he goes, "Peggy, you said even less in here than you are in the room." And she goes, "It's hard to put into words." And then he gets all cranky and goes, "Then you have failed." And she goes, "You definitely feel something that I think some women would like to feel." It's so awkward for her to try to explain this product to her boss, and you feel the embarrassment here.
Yeah, it's a fun, humorous scene. There's a professional purpose for this embarrassment, right? Because they need to understand the essence of the product so they can figure out what the campaign is. But then the other piece here I liked is at the end, then, when Don offers some legitimate professional advice. And again, it seems to see how Don's recognizing Peggy's utility, that she's worthy of this advice and that she's someone with something to say and who can make a contribution. Whatever his motives are for accepting and recognizing that reality, he's coming to the well and drinking the water because he's starting to see there is a benefit here.
Yes, Peggy doesn't express difficulty coming up with ideas, and she doesn't ask him for help. He offers it unsolicited, and this is a huge change. It wasn't so long ago that Don was surprised Peggy had anything valuable to say at all. And now he offers the tiniest bit of mentoring to her. And she truly values and appreciates that moment where he gives her attention to her in that way. Both Don and Peggy care about the work and the work process, maybe more than they care about other people. So it's maybe the first time this is truly solidified between them that they have this in common.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that there is a professional dedication that exists here. They both share and aspire to it, and they're starting to see this connection between themselves, which is interesting because they're really coming at it from very different places. And you get the sense up to this point, they haven't been able to see that.
In the next scene, we see Betty at home. The weather is still unseasonably warm, and she opens the door to an air conditioned salesman and she instantly says, "I'm not interested." And he says, "Could I trouble you for a glass of water? It's a scorcher out here." This air conditioner salesman is played by Adam Kaufman. You might recognize him from State of Affairs or Without a Trace or way back in Dawson's Creek and Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of tension in this scene, and I think we perceive it from Betty's standpoint. She's lonely, her days are long and boring. Now this stranger is in her house. In the commentary, Weiner stresses that the salesman is very mission focused. So that statement about, "Hey, could I come in and have a drink of water?" It's a standard salesman pitch to get your foot in the door and just buy some more time to make your pitch, which he proceeds to do. The whole while, Betty's thinking about things, fantasizing or this excitement of having this visitor. It's a fraught scene, but there's really nothing exciting happening in it. It's all just in that perception of where Betty's headspace is at.
Yes, and in contrast, we've had a whole bunch of very quick scenes with snappy dialogue. And here, This scene seems a little long. It's not that it's boring, but it does make you think something really important is going to happen with this character. And instead, this setup is intended, I think, to mirror Betty's life and her expectations. So even a very minor visitor is a huge event in her day. She is shut up in her home with the kids, and there are limits to where she can go and who she can see. And it also shows us that she's not unfaithful, and even the appearance of impropriety makes her uncomfortable, unlike her husband. I wondered, so after he's trying to make the sale and she agrees he can take some measurements, what do you think changes that makes her go from talking about the air conditioning measurements to asking him to leave? What shifts in her mind?
I just think it's as her fantasies develop in her head, and now they're going upstairs to the bedroom with the stranger. I think at that point she just gets cold feet or uncomfortable with where her head is at and realizes she needs to shut this down and push him out.
And remember a few episodes back when Helen Bishop's ex-husband asked to use the phone, she said, "I don't let strange men into my home." And now, of course, she has. It's not that I wanted her to get it on with the air conditioner salesman, but when she says, "Please go," and he does, and she sits there on the stairs by herself and she looks so small and so lonely again, I do feel really sorry for her. It's very hard not to, I think.
Yeah, agree. It's another scene where it just emphasizes she's lonely and unfulfilled.
The next scene takes us back to Dawn's office. Bert comes in to tell Dawn that he needs to be at the Lucky Strike meeting to draw focus from Roger. He calls the guest of honor because we know Roger has been out after his heart attack. This evolution from Dawn being the creative team lead to being a key stakeholder in the business seems to be happening pretty rapidly.
Yeah, I think that's true. And in this case, Lee Sr. from Lucky Strike is uneasy with what he's heard about Roger's condition and where the future may lie. So he's coming all the way up from down south to visit the office with the sole purpose, really, of meeting with Roger.
This cuts to one of my favorite scenes in this episode, and I think I like it because it seems so genuine. It's Rachel talking to her sister, they're having lunch. Just like Peggy's mother was trying to set up Peggy with a nice guy, her sister knows a guy at Columbia Law for Rachel, and Rachel admits she's being seeing Dawn a little bit, but she lies when she says nothing's happened. And this feels like Dawn's toxicity at work. This confident woman who was so disarmingly honest is now lying to her sister and to herself. She says things that people say to convince themselves. I feel close to him. He might be married, but he's not happy. It really feels like she's sinking here. It's not just the infidelity, it's how she's justifying it that makes her seem less than she was.
Yeah, agreed. And the sister throws cold water on it and basically calls out the stereotypes here of exactly what Rachel is saying and says, look, he's never going to leave his wife, or you're going to be found murdered somewhere. There's a fair bit of humor here, but yeah, I think your point about Rachel's not having an honest and open conversation with her sister. She's floating trial balloons and really trying to edit and shape just how much truth is in each of them, and probably not much enjoying her sister's response, because her sister's responses are very much where Rachel was a couple episodes back.
Yeah, she definitely knows better. I do love this line between them. I I really like their rapport. Something about it really works to me. And the sister says, "All I know is what I see in the movies. It's magical." And he talks about leaving his wife, and then he doesn't. I saw this one where he gets the woman pregnant, so he kills her. You don't want to be that woman. It's just like, I mean, there's no in between. It's just like either you go out with a nice guy from Colombia or the guy gets you pregnant and kills you. Like, that's your option.
It's funny, but I think the larger point is it's not going to end well. There's no good ending here, no fairy tale path that Rachel, rather uncharacteristically to what we've seen of her character to this point, seems to be putting all her chips on that possible happy path, and her sister's just throwing cold water all over it.
And as they wrap up their lunch, the fortune cookie is on the nose. Her fortune says, "You are your own worst enemy." And Rachel just laughs and says, "Oh, that's yours." She's pushing it aside for as long as she can.
Yeah, it's a great scene. We then cut to Dawn and Betty in bed at the end of the day. Betty tells Dawn he looks tired, says he's working too much. She reaches across and touches Dawn's chest. Obviously, she's interested in some companionship and reconnecting. Dawn's having no part of that. Basically, his rejection seems to lead her into talking about the air conditioner salesman who came by the house.
Yeah, it really, her disappointment at his wordless rejection, she's determined to get his attention no matter what she has to do. So she says that the air conditioning guy was in the house today and he gets really angry. And finally, she has his full attention, but it's anger. He's like, "Do you know what could happen?" And she goes, "I could have bought an air conditioner." And we get a call out here in this scene. In this show, a lot of times characters talk about what people do or what they don't do. And Betty uses that. She says, "Salesmen come into people's homes every day." This theme about what people do recurs across the series. And it is pretty nervy of Dawn to be upset about a man in the house when he's cheated on her with two different people, or three if you count kissing Eleanor, and we're only in season 1 here. And when she says he doesn't want to spend the money on the air conditioner, remembering he gave $2,500 to Midge recently, and he dismisses her. "Good night, Betty." The discussion's over, and she just lies there, frustrated. This is such a no-win situation, and we know exactly how hypocritical he's being.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I guess another thing I would say there is it's interesting what it says about Don's mentality here. He's still possessive of Betty. He is jealous when she mentions this. Given his proclivities, I'm thinking when he thinks about, what could happen, he's not thinking about like what Rachel's sister was talking about. He's talking about, some adulterous affair or something. So even as he's fallen in love with somebody else, he's still trying to retain his claim and control over his unhappy wife and not giving much thought at all to her genuine happiness or what are his obligations in that relationship.
No, he has no interest in developing their loving relationship, if, as you pointed out, if they ever indeed had one. It's only that she's a prop in his life, and if she messes that up, it's a problem for him.
Agreed. We then cut back to the office, and we've got Roger coming in so that he can make an appearance at the Lucky Strike meetings today. Roger doesn't look great. Mona's with him. She tells him that he's only got an hour. Dawn offers a compliment. And then we cut to Paul and Pete talking about how he looks.
They're such gossips. They're talking about how he looks sickly. And you like how Roger, true to form, he makes a couple of jokes. Everybody comes in and they applaud for him, even though they're thinking, "Hey, you really look sick." He says, "I shall be both dog and pony." They lead him back to his office and he sits there remembering. And he says, he's with Dawn. He says, "That's the spot where the heart attack happened." And Dawn looks uncomfortable with this whole line of conversation because how dare Roger make Dawn feel uncomfortable ever. And Bert brings Joan in. They want her to use some makeup to help Roger look a little healthier. As Dawn puts it, "We don't need Miami Beach. Just do what you can do."
What did you think of this conversation between Roger and Joan, where Roger's reminiscing about the times he's had with Joan?
Okay, I do want to talk about this because in this scene, Roger looks at Joan and he says a couple of lines that a lot of viewers find very repugnant. He says, "I want to tell you something because you're very dear to me, and I hope you understand this comes from the bottom of my damaged heart. You're the finest piece of ass I've ever had, and I don't care who knows it. I'm so glad I got to roam those hillsides." She says, "Stop it," in response. And I'll put that to you, too. Do you think this is a terrible thing of him to say?
I have to admit I'm not a fan of it, but I do think it comes from a heartfelt place. I guess the part of it that struck me was it feels like he's talking in the past tense, that their affair, their relationship is over now. I wondered if you got that vibe.
I noticed that from her point more. When they're first alone and she's not seen him since the heart attack, she asks if she can kiss him, but she doesn't say anything intimate or personal. She said, "I missed you too," as she's putting on makeup. And remember, Bert recently commented to her she could do a lot better, not to waste her youth on age. And she had already been feeling frustration about Roger's lack of notice for her plans. I don't think his comments are as bad as the fact that he talks about his family problems with her and then doesn't listen to her concerns about the relationship. And when he follows up with, "I've had a lot of time to think about the things I've done and been sorry about, and being with you is not one of them." And to your point, this does seem kind of like a goodbye. Now, from Mona's perspective, I think this is a pretty sorry tale because you wish that he had regrets about being unfaithful to someone who seems pretty devoted to him. But from Joan's perspective, I don't see it as entirely unflattering. And maybe I'm reading something in that's not there. It feels to me like it's easier for him to compliment the physical piece out loud but he's actually talking about being with her. Like it's more than what he's saying that's important to him. So it feels to me like it's a vulnerable thing he shares with her. It seems like she receives it that way too. She tears up, but she doesn't reciprocate. She dries her tears and stands, and she doesn't give that back to him. She doesn't say that he has meant something to her. He catches her hand and she pauses and then she walks away.
But I think I totally agree with your take there. But I think the origins of that difference are the relationship is fundamentally different from each of their perspectives. I think Joan is Rachel here, clinging to this hope, this dream that somehow this could end up being something more than what it is, a dalliance by Roger. And I think she's come to the realization that that's exactly what it is. There is no future in it. And I agree with you. I think she's edging towards the door of ending this. And then, the heart attack and everything stirs things up. On his side, I do feel he's realizing this dalliance has to end as well. And it is a kiss off and a farewell that he's giving. And I like the way you said it as it's not unflattering, even if we don't like the way he put it together. And like you say, he's looking at the relationship for what it was from him. And what is it? It's this dalliance with this younger woman who's attractive and turns him on, and he's had a good time. But again, there's no future in it. He's thinking about his own mortality and all the rest of it. So it's a great scene because I think they each, for their own reasons, are turning away from this relationship, which seems that it was pretty hot and heavy for the last year.
It really amplifies his own selfishness. And he seems genuinely surprised when she tears up and he says, "Oh, Red, that's not what I wanted." I mean, he cares about her to the extent that he can care about her, but she definitely seems a lot less invested in their relationship. And I do think that she was coming to a place before the heart attack happened where she saw this coming. I don't think she's exactly like Rachel because I feel like she has probably been in this situation with different people more than once. I don't think she has illusions about him leaving his wife for her, right? I think that she knew this day would come. And the only question is, how soon does it become official?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I guess what I probably meant to say more was she's at the end of her interest in these types of relationships. They don't go anywhere. She needs something else. She's not getting younger. And she's starting to think about where does this go?
The next scene, again, we've got Rachel talking to her sister, and then we see Betty visiting Francine in the nursery. So Francine's had her baby. Francine is smoking in the baby's nursery room, and Betty offers to go someplace else. And she says, "No, the door squeaks louder than our talking." She's a good sleeper, thankfully. Betty reveals that she let the air conditioning salesman into her house. And Francine is really surprised by this. Like, this is a scandalous thing.
Well, and not only that, Francine basically calls out Betty's tactics of, why would you even let Dawn know you did that? Because it's just so obviously something you shouldn't do. And we know the truth is she was trying to make Dawn feel jealous and feel something. So almost like Rachel with the sister, I feel this scene mirrors it with Betty and Francine, where the friend is truth serum, no illusions. And it's Rachel and Betty who are the ones kind of pitching a story and leaving out some details and not being wholly completely honest with their companion.
And this sexism call out here, where Francine says, "Carlton would break my arm," in response to Betty saying it was foolish letting him in and Dawn wasn't happy about it, because they have to take responsibility for all these things, knowing, well, they don't know it, but we know that their husbands are unfaithful. And it's such a double standard what they're expected to model and reject and perform as compared to the standard of their husbands, which seems to be go do whatever you feel like.
For all I know, Francine's husband is an angel and a saint.
Oh, we know better. We just don't know it yet. Remember, he's the one who hit on Helen Bishop. I guess we already know that part, but
Yeah, it's and also at the end when Betty says, "Oh, Dawn's very protective," and we as the viewers are thinking controlling, manipulative. Other words come to mind than protective.
yeah, she tells Francine, hoping that's really true, hoping he's really protective. And that's what this is about. Similarly to Rachel, it's just you see her working really hard to convince herself that the positive thing is what's true.
From here, we're back in the boardroom. Lee Sr.'s there. Roger comes in, looks great, doing his quips, grabbing a drink, grabbing a bite to eat.
They're serving pastrami and pickles, which the Southerner declares is Yankee barbecue in his Southern accent.
Which is a great line. They're talking about the challenges for Lucky Strike with these lawsuits determining that cigarettes are now harmful, and the cigarette makers are having to come up with new ideas about how they're going to sell their product. Everything seems to be going well, Roger's showing well, and then suddenly he suffers another heart attack.
Yeah, the moment that happens, Roger picks up a cigarette and he starts to toast to New Yorkers with a sandwich. There's no damage control to be done here. Pete, who always has something to say, is silent, looking disconcerted, and so is the client. I do want to back up for our first truth call out in this episode, appears in this scene. It's a combination signs of the times moment, too. They're talking about cigarettes and the lawsuit, and Pete says they speculate they'll put warning signs on cigarette packages, which, of course, is what modern audiences are used to. And Lee Garner Sr. says, "Is that true?" And Roger is very smooth and says, "It must be. He just said it." And so to have Roger go down when he's been holding together so well is just devastating. Quickly, we cut to the next scene where Roger is being wheeled out on a gurney again. And this time, Joan sees him passing by in this hallway. And Dawn says to Roger, "Don't talk. This was stupid." It wasn't his idea to impress the client by having Roger there. And he's not going to pretend it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and Dawn makes a point of apologizing to Mona, who turns on Bert and is very angry and upset because she knows exactly that this was Bert's plan to wheel him out. And her words include, "I used to think you couldn't put a value on human life, but I never asked Bert Cooper, did I? Go to hell, Bert." So the Ayn Randian is running into a wife's love of her husband.
You can understand she's upset in that moment and ready to place blame on him. But this exchange made me wonder about their past and if there was anything else that led her to that conclusion, like what other dramas had happened, or just the overall trend of Roger giving his life to the office, maybe.
Yeah, I didn't personally speculate on that. I just figured, assuming Mona has known Bert for decades, and we know already that Bert is just this clear-eyed, unsentimental voice of reason, sort of whatever's best for the firm, that's what Bert goes for. And if that means wheeling in a guy who just had a heart attack in order to wave the flag, then Bert's up for that, and that's what Bert wants to do. And it's gone sideways now, and Mona's very upset with it. But I wonder if maybe some of Mona's ire is against herself, because presumably this idea would have been floated. Roger and Mona would have talked about it. Mona clearly wasn't able to dissuade him from doing it or put her foot down to stop it. How hard did she try? It's unknown.
Well, and you can tell they bargained for it because when he comes in, she says 1 hour, that's all you get. So that was their compromise. And it's still 1 hour was too much.
1 hour was too much. Yeah, absolutely.
And Bert does not follow Roger to the hospital. Instead, he turns to Lee Garner Sr. and he assures him, "I don't need to tell you that Don has everything under control. It's business. That's where his heart is." Lee turns and advises Bert, "We all like Don Draper, but if I was you, I'd find some way to show him you all do too." He has a great
Yeah,
draw.
it's interesting because Lee Sr. and Bert both have switched subjects from, "Oh, is Roger okay? He's in the middle of a second heart attack. I'm very worried about him." They're back to business now, both of them. And the business is locking in Dawn. And I think Lee Sr. mentions that his board will want some guarantees or certainty that they've got this creative genius locked in to support Lucky Strike. So it is interesting how, in a very cold-blooded way, both Lee Sr. and Bert are back on the clock, even as Roger's still in the elevator going down the building.
And the next scene echoes that because the office guys are all gossiping and talking about their jobs. None of them are talking about Roger's health. It's all politics. So Harry, who is so unlikable, but this is a darkly funny line, he says, "Most clients will put up with one coronary, but they draw the line at two." And they're all predicting that Don will become a partner. And Pete is super resentful. He says everyone else is holding Don Draper on their shoulders so he can reap the benefits. But none of the other guys see it that way. Ken has legitimate respect for Don's work, and he describes Don brings the clients in and goes through their pockets, and Sal nods in agreement. Paul sees it as opening up spots for them to climb the ladder. And he says to Pete, kind of surprised, "You don't think he deserves it, do you?" So this is an interesting reveal of all their micro-politics.
Yeah, and when we think about Pete's assessment of Don Draper, in a world where Don Draper loves Pete and they get along royally, I just have to think Pete's opinion is, oh, Don Draper walks on water and he's a great guy. In a world where Don Draper doesn't like Pete, then suddenly it's not only is Don Draper bad and ungrateful and the rest and a threat to his career. You just, again, it's Pete being Pete, right? He can't be objective. Everything is personalized and seen through that lens. And in this case, where Don is scary and threatening, he certainly can't admit to himself that Don could do his job well.
So, in a weird way, I guess it's not just sexism that keeps him from acknowledging Peggy's merits. He is equally ready to dismiss Dawn's merits, too.
I think absolutely. Pete is about Pete. So anything that serves Pete is good and to be valued and deserving, and anything that's a threat to Pete is the opposite. That's the lens he looks through life with.
And keeping with that same sort of it's all about me vibe, Paul wonders aloud whether Don Draper likes him. And he says to Harry, he likes you. And Harry replies, I work at it. And this is a whole thing. It is easy to dislike Paul for being this needy. And Harry's mechanical sucking up and disregard for others' feelings is just as ugly as Pete's, but he's got less screen time to demonstrate it. So that is something to watch for as the show progresses.
From here, we cut to a restaurant where Peggy's meeting with the man that her mother had set her up with from her past.
I really like this scene too. This is another one of my favorites from this episode. You see Carl Winter being played by Aaron Hill. You may have seen him in Twisted or in Greek.
In the scene, Peggy's very much playing up her aspects of her new life. So she's a Manhattan woman. She's talking about some of her professional dalliances here as a copywriter and, not emphasizing she's primarily an admin at this point. The man is hearkening back to their prior life and where he knew her before and some of these changes that he's seeing. And then Peggy kicks off the fireworks a little bit with a bit of a shot at him.
Even though it's painful, I really like this scene. Throughout the series, we see Peggy stretching to become something other than what she is, and sometimes she reaches and succeeds, and other times it doesn't quite work. And here we see her trying on this new personality. So with Pete, she was very honest and direct, even if she said very little to him overall. But on this date, she is pretending to be such a different person. It is hard to keep track of all the exaggerations and untruths she's spitting out. She says she smokes all the time. We've not seen her smoke. She orders a drink that Joan usually chooses, she says, and she's spitting it out when it's not as sweet as she's expected. She shares her own apartment with Marjorie, and she says she's a character, but we know earlier that they don't actually get along. And she says she just got a new account the other day, and Don went out of his way to call it an assignment, not an account. And Peggy is really puffing up her importance here. I don't love this about Peggy in this moment, but I understand it. It feels like she wants to show off, but she's more showing off for herself. Like she doesn't actually want to impress this guy who seems to be listening attentively. And in a reversal, he calls her on her bad behavior simply and honestly by repeating the thing that she says to him, so you drive a truck. And he's proud of his work and his trajectory, and so is she. So for her to be dismissive and looking down on him when she's experienced so much of that is disappointing.
It is, and if I like the writing here because if I put myself in his shoes, I think he's proud of what he's achieved since they've last spoken. So he's looking forward to rolling that out and impressing her with it and expecting she's going to say, oh, wow, you have your own route and you're going places and you've been successful. And instead, he's confronted with her doing this show of all her success, and then she minimizes his success. So it's not Peggy's finest moment here. And he reacts to that in a way where he starts, slagging back at her and insulting what she does. And Peggy, being honest, says, why are you insulting what I do? He comes with sort of his killer comeback to her, which is, you act like you're from Manhattan, but you don't look like these other girls.
And that does it. She gets up to leave, and you can tell he feels instantly bad. He says, hold on, that wasn't nice. And in that moment, she gives up the pretense she was clinging to the whole time. And she says, I feel sorry for you. Those people in Manhattan, they are better than us because they want things they haven't seen. Do you feel like this is a spoiled mentality to have so much and want so much more? I mean, what do you think makes Manhattan so magical to Peggy?
I think it's about ambition. I think it's about an opportunity to play in the big game, in the big puddle, and see what you can make of yourself. And this is everything she wants professionally in her life. So she's thriving and striving and struggling, and she's had some real setbacks, but she's also had some real successes at this point. And here she is looking to impress someone from her former life, and the whole thing goes sideways where she hurts him, he hurts her back, and then she puts an end to it. So I just really love the writing here because I think it's so real of things that happen with people, and we sort of go off the rails, and nobody intended it to land in this place from either side of this conversation, but suddenly both cars are upside down in the ditch, and it's painful, but it feels very real to me.
It's definitely a great line, and I appreciate that Peggy's not going to just sit there and try to make the best of this date anymore. She's going to go. But with the line, those people in Manhattan, they are better than us. And I think about who are those people in Manhattan, right? Like Roger or Don, like are those people really better? So the idea that because they have so much and they have so much opportunity and the fact that she's looking up to that and aspiring to be like them, I can admire her professional ambition and drive, but I worry about that as a goal. And I wonder if in fact, nice guy here with his own truck route, maybe that is a more honorable thing to aspire to.
Okay, I think the difference between us when she says those people in Manhattan want something they haven't seen yet, I don't think she's talking about Dawn or Roger. I think she's talking about herself. She's talking about the strivers, those ambitious people who are seeking something that never existed in their world to this point. And that's I think who she's aspiring to be, because I think she's already seen the ugly side of the Dawns and Rogers, and that's not her in any shape or form. I also think it's her putting distance between herself and him in the sense of what does he want? All he wants is what he's seen. So the best that he's seen is, oh, you can get a truck and have your own route and the rest. And and I think maybe that's why her put down is so cutting to him, because that's the best thing in his world that he's striving for and feeling some pride in having achieved. And she's dismissing it as not even being worthy or somehow being lesser. And I think that's what really pricks him emotionally and leads to his lash out to her. And you can see she doesn't retreat from it so much as I think she doubles down on it. And it really, to me, reveals the depths of her ambition and what she's going for. And she's not going to let go of it. Her teeth are sunk into it. And anyone who's trying to, I don't know, haul her back or put her back in her place is going to hit a brick wall.
It's a weird juxtaposition because I certainly admire her ambition in the face of all of her obstacles and her ability to dream big and reach for something that nobody she knows has done. Well, at least not in her family, or nobody has dreamed of that for her. So I appreciate that. But I also feel like, oh, I don't want you to become part of that machine that steps on other people the way that people have stepped on you. And to see her doing it, to reach what you want, you have to become that thing. It's disappointing.
It is definitely disappointing, but I think it's a comment on the peril and the danger of this path. So I'm with you. You know, it's inspiring and you love that ambition and fire in her belly, but there are dangers here and perils that are lurking, and you could turn into something you're not, or start to behave in ways that you would never have dreamed of before. So nothing's free in this world. There are always trade-offs and costs and benefits. So again, I love the writing in this scene, and it's such a great peek into where Peggy came from and where Peggy is today, and I think where Peggy wants to go in the future.
And it is especially since, here's the advertising world about image and what everything looks like. And she's giving the trappings of it with the cigarettes and the drink. Really, what's changed is internally. And he's accusing her right back. Like, you don't look like that. It's not the outside that has changed. That's a pretense. But the inside, really, we can see is changing and will continue to.
Yeah, and what takes it off the rails is the real stuff, right? The cosmetic stuff that slides by, and like you say, he seems perfectly polite and listening and hearing her and watching her put on her little show. Where things get rough is when things get real.
In the next scene, we see Dawn and Betty watching TV on the couch, smoking. She gets up to go to bed and looks at him. And again, a rejection. He says, I'll be up. he needs to go into his study to call her psychiatrist and get a report.
Yeah, and Don jumps on the phone with the psychiatrist and talks about how it doesn't seem to be working, that Betty's not being made happy or more in control, that she's becoming more unhappy.
In this moment, the psychiatrist says, I understand this is frustrating for you. And Don insists, this has nothing to do with me. It's her. So he's completely isolated from her. Like he bears no responsibility for this. He says, you took a woman with a bad case of nerves and you made her weaker, not stronger. I'm afraid to leave her alone. And this blame he's ascribing to her is so painful.
Yeah, it is, and I really found it interesting in Weiner's commentary, where Weiner says that when he was writing this, he wanted to indicate that Dawn is looking to leave Betty and wants to leave her standing on her own 2 feet. But because of this lack of progress in this situation, it's really frustrating to him because right at the moment where he's seriously contemplating leaving, it becomes clear to him that this is going to completely destroy her and destroy his family. So it's highly inconvenient to Don Draper.
And here's this whole human being who's inconvenient to him. Yeah. Betty is an adult and she has agency, but for Don to treat Betty the way he does and then be shocked by her unhappiness or perceived weakness is so hard to take. I mean, we can't say that Dawn causes her behavior entirely because, of course, she can choose her response. But he certainly contributes to her so-called nerves and so-called weakness by completely ignoring her and minimizing her feelings and opinions. So
And he,
to
and he
then
doesn't
blame
seem
her is, ugh.
and he doesn't seem to take any agency. So who failed? The psychiatrist failed. The psychiatrist should have fixed this by now, and it's not fixed. But what's the root of it all? We know what it is. It's lack of attention and lack of being a true partner, and she's lonely and all the rest of it. She's unfulfilled. And he's made no real steps here. I mean, he didn't stand in the way of the modeling thing, but he knew all along that was just a pitch from McCann, to try and get to him. It wasn't a real thing. So it is interesting at just how little ownership he takes here. And he's quite content to vent on the psychiatrist and continue to reject and contribute to Betty's unhappiness rather than be invested in the relationship as a true partner, basically in the way that he's sharing with Rachel at the current time.
In the next scene, Peggy comes in with a relaxocyzer, and now she has to talk to the office men who regularly sexually harass women about this rejuvenator. So it is a delicate business. She comes up with a couple of good lines. Isn't it nice to feel that way whenever you want? And you'll love the way it makes you feel. This presentation is not easy for her, but she seems to do pretty well. Fred and Ken both say positive things after she presents.
Both times now, it's Freddie who's suggested, "Hey, let's hear from Peggy and see what she has to say." And both times he comes right out. And in this one, he even makes it clear, I'm not waiting to hear what Don's ruling is as the king bee in the room. He's going to say, it's good. And I also find it interesting, again, Ken is very forthcoming with praise to say, yeah, it is good. And I think they all know that, whether it's conscious or subconscious, they realize how tough this gig was. And yet again, she's come through with flying colors in this circumstance. So it is a great scene, I think, where she may not be a copywriter officially or in their minds just yet, but she's bringing the substance of exactly what a good copywriter would bring.
And Don gives Peggy some feedback about her presentation. He says, don't use Latin, give more of a hint about what it does. And this is all very appropriate work-related feedback, taking the lead from this important figure, the most important person in the room. This really matters because this will affect how the other guys see her and treat her professionally. And on the way out, Don adds to Peggy, that wasn't so bad. They had been joking about somebody's wife, and Harry pauses to say that Freddie's wife doesn't look like Mitch's, and it was gross and mansplaining, but it does feel like he's including her a little bit. And Ken says, good work, Pegs, on his way out. And Pete says, looks like everybody liked it. And Peggy smiles and says, I can tell. And at this point, you can see she doesn't care about his approval. He gives it so reluctantly, and here he didn't even voice it for himself. What a snake.
Yeah, he doesn't give the approval. When Ken punches her on the arm, that's just another indication too. Like she's becoming one of them now. She's becoming one of that gang, and it's such a triumph for her professionally. So it's a great moment, and we start to see she's separating herself, because remember when Freddie invited her input this time, he said, "Let's see if lightning will strike twice." And just that wording suggests, well, no, of course it doesn't. It's highly improbable. Lightning has now struck twice, which suggests this isn't random chance. There's some substance here, and everyone in the room is seeing it. Even Pete, I think, sees it, although he won't admit it aloud to her.
In the next scene, we see Betty at home with a washing machine. She's fantasizing about the air conditioning guy. The air is still warm. After she has this fantasy, it is striking how lonely she is in her box of a house. And in an interesting parallel, just like in a previous episode with the Belle Jolie campaign, where we saw Betty showing Sally how to apply lipstick, here Betty's fantasy also parallels Dawn's office and specifically Peggy's advertising assignments. So it's like Betty is an echo of the real life Dawn's living while he's creating images for people to aspire to, even though most people would probably aspire to the life he has with Betty.
Yeah, again, from a superficial perspective, it seems like the perfect marriage of two beautiful people living the dream, and we know the reality is so different. And we feel pity and sympathy for Betty. She's lonely. Her life lacks passion. It lacks achievement. She's just not a happy person.
The next scene is a quick one. Peggy comes in to ask Dawn about having her own desk for copywriting. And he pushes back. He says, you have a desk. And she doesn't back down. She says, now I have radio spots. And he redirects her to ask directly for a raise. Don't be timid. You presented like a man. Now act like it. And this is weird. I think it's supposed to be a compliment, I guess, that she presented like a man. And he's giving her some professional advice. So it feels condescending and incorrect and rude. Oh, she presented like a man. No, she's a woman. Sexist much. But it is almost like he enjoys helping her a little. It's a funny mix because I know that Weiner intends it to be a compliment, but it doesn't feel great either. What do you think?
I view it less as intended to be a compliment and more as a clear sign of Dawn won't be an impediment to this. He sees her merits, he sees her substance, and he's not in the way of it. In fact, he's the one who says, hey, go ahead and ask for what you want. This is how it works. And it's almost like taking the training wheels off a bit here, or sending a clear sign of you are morphing into something else now, and things need to work a certain way. So it is all wrapped up in that sexism of present like a man and all the rest. But I think the interesting conclusion here is, unlike some of the sexism we've seen where people just can't let go of it, that sexism can't get in the way of Dawn's desire for the performance and outcomes that Peggy can clearly deliver. So she's well on her way and launched. And it seems he's only too happy to consent to her demands on the salary.
The next scene is quick, but it's very funny. Maybe one of my favorite lines in this episode. The last time we saw Pete and Hildy, he told her that she should have a drink with him and, quote, do something about that sourpuss. So now when he says, Cooper and Draper just went into his office, tell me when they come out, she looks at him with no facial expression at all. And she says, sure, I'll just sit here and watch the door. That's all I'll do. And it's not even that cutting, but you're definitely on Hildy's side here.
Yeah, and I also like that Pete certainly gets the vibe that Hildy's sending, and he's offended and irritated by this insolence coming from a lowly admin. But it's a great moment for Hildy to stick a knife between his ribs and just irritate him a bit, especially since it's so obvious he's on edge, because he knows as Dawn rises, this may not be the best development for his own career, given his frictions with Dawn.
And the next scene takes us behind that door where we see Dawn and Bert talking. We find out Roger is recovering at home. Bert says he wants to make Dawn a partner and that Dawn will be in charge of hiring a new head of account services. That brings us to our double dip question for our listeners this episode. Does Dawn deserve to be a partner at Sterling Cooper at this point? We appreciate getting your input at madmenc2z.com, and we look forward to sharing your comments on a future episode.
It's kind of an offer you can't refuse for Dawn. I mean, hey, we're going to make you partner, give you 12%. The only thing Dawn really says back is no contract. He does not want to be tied down and constrained. Just like Roger previously, Bert has no problem with that. His only comment is kind of a funny foreshadowing, beware the nonconformist.
As they finish up, Pete comes into Roger's office as Dawn is looking around, kind of trying on his new power position from the view of Roger's office. And Pete is really ready to suck up, and Dawn is ready to wield some power. So he says, in a very petty way, he says, I might need this office if I'm going to lure Marty Brennan as head of account services. And Pete, in our second call out, says, then it's true. Congratulations. Pete instantly understands Dawn has a partnership, and that changes the balance of power now between them.
Pete spends the rest of the scene trying to ingratiate himself to Dawn, and Dawn seems to enjoy just dangling out there that he's got the power now. And Pete says he wants to throw his hat in the ring to be the head of account services. Did Dawn know that? And Dawn says, I do now. There's nothing friendly or warm in Dawn's interaction. It's clearly an exercise of power where Dawn is now wearing the crown and Pete is going to have to adjust.
So as Dawn gets ready to leave for the day, he sees Peggy. He says, we both had very good days. You may leave your post. She says, oh, it's 4:30. It's not time. And she has work to do. Again, she's focused on her work. And he says, you can have your raise. I will talk to Miss Holloway about getting somebody else on your desk while you attend to your assignment. And Peggy has her own power moment. So while Dawn was lording his promotion over Pete, Peggy says, can I tell her? Meaning she wants to get to be the one to tell Joan that she's going to have her own desk now. It's an important point, too, that he sends her home. So he sends her away from her desk here. It's not that she was skipping out early or derelict in her duties, as we'll see in the next minute or so.
Well, and it further illustrates the change in her status because as an admin, Dawn wouldn't send her away from her desk. That has to route through Joan. Now Dawn sends a copywriter home early. It just further illustrates that she's changing her role in that office.
The next scene is really quick. We see Pete walking out of his office, drink in hand. And it's so rude. He leaves his empty glass on Hildy's chair just because he is extra Pete right now. And he walks into Dawn's office because Peggy isn't sitting in front of it to be a barrier. So he strides right in. He sets his briefcase down, sits in Dawn's chair, and he puts his feet up, just claiming space at Dawn's desk.
Yeah, Pete punching down at Hildy is just another pathetic reason why we hate Pete so much. A package delivery guy comes in, mistakes Pete seated at Dawn's desk with his feet up as Dawn Draper, and hands him this package that has been mailed from Adam, which we saw at the start of the episode.
I love the detail that Pete looks at it and he kind of tosses it on the desk. He picks up his briefcase. He goes to leave. He's not going to take it, but then he comes back and he takes that package with him. And we're not sure what's in it, but we're pretty sure that Pete shouldn't have it.
Yeah, and it's an interesting package too because it's, hand labeled and Adam doesn't have the best penmanship. So it is a curious little parcel that's shown up. And I guess if we climb into Pete's head, we can understand why he's so curious. He's willing to do this, which I think intercepting mail is actually a crime. So it's a high risk gesture on his part if he were to be caught out with it.
In the next scene, Dawn is coming home. The kids are watching TV and Signs of the Times. He says, back away from the set, you'll burn your eyes out. Betty sees Dawn and she's pouring them some iced tea and he gets to tell her he made partner. Before they can celebrate, she apologizes about the whole thing about the air conditioner and he avoids that conversation, true to form. She gives him a kiss and a smile. She says, oh, Dawn, congratulations. But it feels pretty perfunctory. So now, instead of them being genuinely happy together in this moment of his professional success, it's not all right between him. So it feels like he was feeling pretty good at work, showing off at Pete. But now Betty is only dutifully impressed and it feels a little hollow.
Yeah, agreed. And he also doesn't take the opportunity of her submitting and apologizing about the AC salesman coming in the house. There was any number of things he could have reciprocated there to indicate I overreacted, I'm just worried about you, etc. He could have met her halfway there to say, hey, let's mutually put aside this tiff. And he doesn't do it at all, which again just feels like another little defeat, a little jab where Betty must submit and bend the knee. And she's not at a place right now where any of this is serving her, in any good way. So it feels tragic that even in the moment of this triumph of something that really should be great news for their marriage and their relationship, and instead it's this hollow going through the motions celebration.
And the scene ends with them actually talking about the weather. She says the heat's supposed to break tomorrow, and he says it'll probably be snowing in 2 weeks. And that's the conversation they're having with each other. Ugh, it's heartbreaking.
We wrap up the episode with back in Peggy's room where she's reading some advertising books as part of her dedication to her job. She puts the book down, takes a look at the rejuvenator on the floor, and it's pretty clear that she's going to be testing the product a little further.
So, yes, Peggy reaching for the relaxicizer. She's grabbing her own power at the office and at home, while Betty is just lonely and stuck. The closing song is Fly Me to the Moon, performed by Julie Howard. We'd like to give a special shout out today to our listeners, especially Charlene F. from San Francisco. We appreciate the social media shares and follows and all your support for our podcast. If any of our listeners would like to leave us a positive review wherever you listen to podcasts or share our podcast with a friend, we are really happy to grow connections and find other fans of this amazing show, Mad Men. Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of All Things Mad Men, from Chip and Dip to Zooby Zoo. Visit our website, madmenctoz.com, to vote for your favorite Sterling lines and to share your opinions on our double dip questions for each episode.
You can find us on Instagram and YouTube at MadmenC2Z, and please listen, like, and subscribe. That's what the podcast's for.
Thanks for listening, everybody.